Each day, there are tens of thousands of vehicles on our roads, and each day there's the risk of serious, even deadly crashes. Over the past several years, the state has taken action to reduce and possibly eliminate traffic deaths by installing traffic calming measures. Those include speed humps and red light cameras. So, are they working? Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of Insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Yanji Denise. We are halfway through 2024, and so far this year there have been 37 traffic fatalities throughout the state. Hawaii County has the unfortunate distinction of leading that list with 18 traffic deaths. As drivers, we can practice safe habits while behind the wheel, but we cannot control what other drivers are doing. To encourage safer driving habits, the state has been using various methods to improve road safety, making drivers slow down and more aware of their surroundings. But some residents are frustrated with these new measures. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. Our phone lines are down for now, but you can still email your questions or leave a comment on our PBS Hawaii Facebook and YouTube pages. You will also find a live stream of this program there. We're also streaming on our website, pbshawaii.org. Now to our guest. Democratic Senator Sharon Moriwaki was elected in 2018 to represent District 12, which includes Waikīkī, Ala Moana, Kakaʻako, and Macaulay. She's a lawyer and also served in former Governor John Waihei's cabinet. Ed Sniffen is the director of the Hawaii Department of Transportation. The agency is responsible for planning, designing, constructing, and operating our state roadways, as well as managing harbors and airports. Edward Aquino is Deputy Public Defender. He has been with the office for almost 25 years, litigating serious felony cases since 2004. He received his law degree from Northeastern University in Boston. And Karen Cheung is the founder of the grassroots organization's Ward Village Moms. Since 2021, the group has advocated for infrastructure safety, especially for pedestrian and road safety in the Kakaʻako area. Thank you all for being here tonight. We're so excited to talk about this. Ed, I want to start with you and that statistic that we read right off the top, the 37 fatalities. How are we doing when it comes to road safety this year compared to years past?
Anytime we can talk about fatalities, any one fatality is too many. As we all know. But this year at 37, we're far less than last year at this time. So we're beating last year's pace, which was actually lower than our normal average. So last year we ended up with 95 fatalities in the state, which was a good number compared to our normal 107 average over the years and the 116 that we had before. So overall, we're doing better than last year, but we still need to do better for the 37 that passed. And
what do you attribute that improvement to?
Many of the discussions that we've had in the past with our communities, our law enforcement communities, and our prosecutors, when we start seeing the issues around the state, it's speed. Speed is what kills in all of the aspects, all of the crashes that occur. There may be different reasons for a crash to occur. Some people may have been driving drunk. Some maybe have been distracted. But the crash or the fatality occurred because of the speed. So we decided if we can reduce that speed, we can minimize the impacts that occur on the system and potentially minimize the types of crashes that occur because people have more time to react. We can save a lot more lives.
Senator, the legislature passed a number of bills to try to help folks slow down, among other things. Tell us a little bit about the bills that were passed, still waiting governor's signature, that you are most excited about when it comes to improving traffic safety.
I think what Ed is talking about is the automatic sensors on speed, because that's critical, and also people running the red light. And we also, there are laws on the books already. It's enforcement. It's from the police to the prosecutor, also working in tandem with administration. So the laws that we passed, put on the books, had to do with driving without a license. What I think that's important is the penalties are increased so that it will hopefully deter people from speeding. But again, it really is enforcement part of it because the law is there, but we're just increasing the penalties so that it makes it even more, people will think twice about speeding. And as Ed said, speeding is the number one, whether they're drunk, driving without a license or driving drunk, or with other kinds of drugs, it really is they're speeding and therefore they hit something. And that's the fatalities that really are really critical that we don't want to have more of.
Karen, I know you were active at the legislature this session testifying on the measures that she's talking about. Tell us a little bit, just for background, about how your group came together and the mothers that you represent.
So it really came together because we go to this park called Koluala Park, and then there's this crosswalk was blacked out, and then we were just very frustrated. We have very young children. Kakaʻako area has the most, young families, millennial mothers like me who have children under 5 years old. And we go to the park, and it was just crossed out, blacked out for no reason. And we found out as I talked to the mothers that everyone complained for 6 months and we still got no response. And so we decided just to protest, and then it captures media attention, and then we got help to get it reinstalled. And that's how we came about. We realized that the community has a concern, and it was just like, we felt like it was a timing bomb, that something would happen.
And so you were able to get that crosswalk reinstated. There's now a speed hump there, from what I understand. That kind of grassroots activity is so powerful. Tell us about the legislation that you were advocating for this term.
This term, we were supporting Yara's mom. So basically, we were really focusing on unlicensed driver. What we really wanted in the bill, in our testimony, was that we want quicker enforcement, meaning that when an unlicensed driver is pulled over, we want their vehicle to be towed right away, and they cannot resume driving. So we've been really pushing for that, to close that gap, because we understand that for someone to get convicted from the day that they, let's say, drive without a license, it could be, let's say, 6 months or 12 months. And that was the exact gap that killed Sarah. So we want to close that gap by taking the vehicle away, or that they just can't resume driving. So that's what we've been really pushing for.
The other Ed Aquino, tell us a little bit about some of the concerns you might have with the legislation that's been passed.
I think our primary concern is what happens when penalties are raised. Currently, at least the last time I practiced in district court, driving without a license was a petty misdemeanor. That means that the penalty is 30 days or less, and then when you get to your third driving without a license, it becomes a year penalty, which then triggers a number of things, primarily the right to a jury trial. So, from my experience, when you do a petty misdemeanor trial in district court for driving without a license, you're talking about an hour and a half trial. Now, oftentimes we do dissuade our clients, given the facts of what driving without a license is, to perhaps not demand jury trial. But when you increase the penalty, and when our clients or people who are charged with driving without a license are looking at significant penalties, they're not going to trust just litigating their case in district court. They will demand jury trial. And when you do demand jury trial, the cost becomes exponential. You go from a 2-hour trial, or maybe less, to a 2-day trial. And now you're talking about 50 people in the community who are brought in to be picked to be 12 members of the jury, plus an alternate. And you're talking about at least half a day of jury selection and then a trial. Because of the increased penalty, a greater attention to the type of case that it is, there's more investigations that's done, and there are more resources that are being pushed into that type of a case. And we're not talking about like if it's an assault case or your typical Class C felony, which is like an unauthorized control of a propelled vehicle, driving a car, stealing a car. We're talking about driving without a license. And last time I checked, I don't have the statistics on this, but anecdotally, that's a significant portion of the district court calendar. That's a lot. And so now if you start increasing penalties, I understand the concern. I understand the concern that we need to stop unlicensed drivers from driving, but when you increase penalties, what we forget is that with the increased penalty, there's with the increased consequence, you also have an increased concern, and you also have an increased use of resources, which includes the right to a jury trial. Now, I'm not going to dissuade anyone from demanding the right to a jury trial. That's a constitutional right. But when you do increase that penalty, you're looking at turning a 30-minute trial or 2-hour trial at the most to a 2-day trial, bringing all these resources, bringing the circuit court judges to litigate these cases, where those resources could be better served actually litigating cases that I wouldn't say much more important, but much more significant, such as, violent type offenses or, huge property type offenses, not driving without a license. That's the concern that we've had, and I think that's one of the reasons why we had opposed the increase of the penalties. We're not opposed to the safety concern that I think every one of us share here. I, for one, share that. I think the efforts by Ed and his organizations, such as the speed bumps, I think work. The red light cameras, I think work. I was concerned. I know I've been away from district court for quite some time, and when I looked at the stats, I asked myself, okay, what do the stats, do the hard facts support these measures? And when I look at the stats, I'm actually sold. I actually agree with that. That those are some of the ways that we can enforce. You want to talk about enforcement, Senator? That's one of the ways we can enforce. It's to create these safety valves, you want to call them, at enforcing this. Perhaps even putting a police officer. I hardly see, speed enforcement these days with police officers. Perhaps they don't have the resources for that. Maybe those resources are better served that way. I don't know.
Karen, I want to go back to you. I mean, why do you think that this is a good allocation of resources? Because he does raise a number of issues just about how much this is going to cost the taxpayer and what this is going to do to burden the judicial system if you have all of these drivers now, getting to have those, 2 days or more in court.
Because I'm a mother. It's very simple. I have children, and I can't ever imagine losing my child. It's a life. And we're talking about something that is preventable. We're talking about unlicensed driver, people who are not qualified to drive. They shouldn't be driving. On third time, they should be out. No question. If you're an unlicensed pilot, would you let that person drive the plane? It's that simple. So I don't think as a mother, I think there are a lot of things, especially comes to children's safety, it's not negotiable.
Senator, what are your thoughts?
Our heart goes out to all of these people who have families that they've lost their child or their mother, their parent. So we look at anything to have a law there for them. And so with the increased penalties, I look at it as a deterrent, that if you put the penalties out, not everybody will go to court, and hopefully they'll drive more safely, knowing that the penalties are higher. So I think it's a law change, but it's also education. And I know, Ed, you folks are doing a lot more in education and safety, but this is the new law, folks. Follow it, right? Or you're going to have to go to jail if you have more than 2 or 3 infractions. And some of these people have 100 or more, and they're not being, they're not actually. It's still seen as a misdemeanor. So it raises it to a felony. But if you go to court, that's the consequences of your actions. So I think this is the idea behind our raising the penalties, so that it is a felony with 3 or more of these infractions.
Yeah, Ed, I see you nodding over there. Do you think that this will be an effective deterrent for drivers who are driving without a license? Because as Karen pointed out, these are folks who have already decided that they don't, the law does not apply. Yeah,
so I think overall, there's going to be discussions on how far is far enough and how far is too far. I can see Ed's point on discussions of court management. And we tried with this law to try and balance out those considerations throughout to make sure that we're putting safety first, but also considering everybody else's resources that we went through. Police and prosecutors had the same concerns about resources that went into pieces like this. But they kind of settled on the discussions that if we can get them on the first or second and stop them from the third, that would be the big win for everybody. So overall, I think the legislature did a really good job of balancing out those concerns and pushing forward on taking care of people's rights, making sure that we took care of the courtroom's time and the resources of our law enforcement partners, while ensuring that everybody understands that this is the law, this is what we're expecting everybody to follow. Because in the end, if we cannot trust a person to get the basic things necessary to drive, licensing, registration, and safety check, very difficult for us to determine that they're going to follow the rest of the laws.
Let's talk about some of the adaptations that you have made at that intersection and beyond. If you drive down that part of Kapiolani Boulevard, there are speed humps and there are red light cameras, and we start to see a lot of speed humps throughout the city and beyond. I just want to read a few of these comments because I think that the viewers have a lot to say, and we love to hear from you. Traffic humps coming up all over the island are designed with safety in mind, but they are not well marked for drivers, especially at night when it's raining or unsafe. Can that be changed? That's from Pat in Kailua. I'm just going to read a couple of these. Gianna says, I love the humps. Put them everywhere, but to be honest, there's not much left to do. Society has lost its mind. We are living in a lawless society where lawbreakers are running wild. I have a speed bump outside of my house, says Kathy, right across the street from an elementary school. People fly over that thing 24/7. All it's good for is major sound pollution. So the question is, let's talk about humps and then let's talk about red light cameras. But starting with the speed humps, how effective are they?
So right now, anytime we put in improvements in the system, we monitor prior to and we monitor after. What our data is showing is a 47% reduction in speeding in those areas, significant reductions in those areas, and a 20 mile per hour reduction in the maximum speed that people go in those areas. All of those contribute or equal out to less opportunities for crashes and less opportunities for increased impacts in those areas. The biggest stats that we can show is a 20% reduction in crashes, pedestrian, bicyclists, or vehicles in those areas, and 0 fatalities in any area that we put in those speed humps. So I apologize for any noise that people might be hearing because of them, but I'm not going to apologize for putting them in because the 0 fatalities speak for itself. And of course, I'm going to knock on everything I can to make sure that we don't see anything in those areas. But I think the numbers are speaking for themselves right now.
And how many do we have, and how many more are you planning?
There's about 200 that we put in across the state on state system and county system. Overall, in all of our networks, we started targeting areas that we knew our keiki and kupuna would be. So we started in school zones primarily, and we started spreading them out to areas that we know there are drivers for pedestrian and bike activity, like parks and beaches. So on the state system, anywhere we have a school crossing, there's going to be a raised crosswalk if there's not a signal there. On the city system, if they have areas that they want to put in speed humps that they can't do quickly, we'll do it for them.
Okay. And Karen, I know that the crosswalk that sort of motivated you to get started in the first place, that is now has a speed hump as part of the crosswalk. What kind of a difference has that made?
Huge difference. At least the car will slow down, and then actually it's more visible for a pedestrian to cross. You can always measure when you lose a life, but you cannot measure clearly when a life is saved. So that's why people say it's useless, it's just creating noise as a hump. But really, like, the inconvenience of that 2 seconds going to a hump, it's someone's life. And just because we can't quantify that a life is saved, it doesn't mean it's not working and it's not worth it. And it also comes to a point that when we talk about speed humps and red lights, I think Ed needs to also look down the road is that how do we have quicker solutions for problematic areas? And how do we do good long-term planning in road designs for both pedestrian and the driver? Because it's not one against another. I'm a pedestrian and I'm also a driver. So I want visibility to know, hey, when should I slow down? When should I look clear? Because a children might be crossing. Sometimes I can't. And I'll be like, oh, dang, I almost hit someone. I don't want to be that person. No one wants to. So I think to Ed, like, I want to give you a question is that how can DTO be faster? How can you do the safety report faster and put in hump, red light, crosswalk sign, or change the, add on a green turn arrow? How do you do that faster?
So for speed humps, 3 weeks. Maximum, 3 weeks. So in those areas, if we see problems, in 3 weeks they'll go in. In areas that we see problems before we put in the speed hump, we can put up our gateway concepts, those delineators and the like, within 2 days. So we've extremely expedited all of our work, which is why we do the work for the city now, if they need it. If things need to be done quickly, we can just get them done.
But there is a question of jurisdiction, right? Because you said like sometimes you're doing it for the city. In the area that Karen got started in, there's also HCDA is part of that equation. So it's also a question of who gets to decide.
Absolutely. So it's always the owner of the jurisdiction. We'll never step into the city's area and tell them this is what's going to happen. We'll always work with them. So when they do their analyses, when they do their considerations, if they find it's warranted to put those in, but they know that their processes don't allow them to move as fast as we do, they'll ask for assistance and we'll get it done.
Okay, let's talk
I'd
about...
like to just
Oh, please.
mention one thing, because I don't think we've had this in the past, but we've got the State Department of Transportation, the City Department of Transportation Services, and HCDA in the Kakaʻako area. But this is the first time I've seen the Department of Transportation state working so closely with the city. So one of the bills we did pass is to have the counties and the state work really closely together to look at critical areas where they can look at planning what should be in those areas. But I must say I commend the city and the state transportation organizations that work really closely together. We've never had that before. And as Ed said, he has lots of money. so he can go in and he can put in what the city will take months to do, he could do in, in a week or two.
Can I jump into something that Ms. Cheung had pointed out? One of the concerns that, our prior discussion before this show was, a lot of the fatalities that anecdotally I've seen is where we have kupuna crossing the street and you have drivers making a left turn. And so one problem that I identified is the Gulik King Street and then Gulik North School Street area, where we pass those roads quite a lot on the way to work, and we've seen more and more kupuna getting hit. And we've demanded that at least put at maybe a left turn signal, a left turn green light. And all we got was a sign that says yield to pedestrians. And despite the fact that there's been fatalities in those intersections, what can DOT do for those situations? Because I don't think enforcing more driving without a license. Some of these drivers are licensed drivers who are involved in these accidents. How do we address that?
So I think in the area, so if this was state jurisdiction, when we get a concern about fatalities that are occurring, and especially consistently occurring with the same types of movements, we would take action based on, you saw it on Moana Boulevard. There were concerns about a right turn on Kamake that was deadly. We shut down the whole right turn. We just shut it down to make sure that we eliminated that potential in that area. And what the area that you're talking about is a city jurisdiction, so I don't know enough about the issue to be able to contemplate a solution there. But that's what we would do on our side.
But that's, I would like to add in, it's very interesting because now you see, as a civilian, I can't distinguish which part is the city or the state. I just want to, report, and that's what we did with Kolowato Park, that there is a dangerous crosswalk that has been blacked out. I couldn't distinguish, but the problem was that once we feed to the system, we were being ping-ponged back and forth for 6 months.
Right. So Ed, what would you say? I think that the two of them are coming more as citizens than advocates in this point. But to the folks watching at home, if they know they have something problematic in their neighborhood and they are getting, what Karen describes as what sounds like kind of a runaround, or just getting some signage that doesn't seem to be making meaningful difference, how do you actually do you contact your city council person? Where do you start?
What I would do is, and for anybody who comes to the DOT with a concern, they don't need to worry about whether it's a state system or a county system. We'll take care of it. If it's a county system, we'll work with them to make sure that it gets resolved and they get back to those that are concerned.
What's your direct lines, Ed?
I know you're going to get a lot of calls after tonight. Let me tell you that.
But that's how we do work. And we've been working a lot closer with the city to make sure that they get any concerns over to us if it's our system as well. But I would recommend that anybody with concerns in their areas, go to their area legislators. I think Sharon and Scott do a really good job of getting on top of things, whether it's city or state jurisdiction. They'll make sure they start pushing towards a solution in those areas. Anytime they get concerns, they give me a call to let me know what concerns are coming up and see what kind of solutions we can come up with right away.
Okay, let's get to some of these red light cameras, and I want you to take some of these questions because there's a lot of people who are very concerned about enforcement and possible penalties, so I would love for you to take that. Dottie in Moana says registered owners of vehicles will be the ones getting the tickets under the red light camera plan, whether they are driving or not. What protections are in place for them? Virtually every county in the U.S. has tried red light cameras and has stopped using them because they cost more to operate than the revenue they generate from the tickets issued. There's no evidence to support the claim that they make the streets safer. It's a waste of time and taxpayers' money. And then one last, that was from Kakaʻako in Kapolei, and Velia says, I have a love-hate relationship with the red light cameras. I run a red light, yes, give me a ticket. Don't give me a ticket because I had to move out of the way because an emergency vehicle was needing to try to get through and no one else moved. So what kind of defense do we have if there's a photograph of me in an intersection, like this driver's saying? Is there a meaningful defense?
I don't know if anyone remembers the van cams.
There are some van cam questions, so some of our viewers
the main defense in the van cam was identification, and you have the right, if you are charged with a crime, and I don't believe that running a red light is a crime right now, it's a violation, but you do have the right to confront your accuser. And the question is, who is that accuser at this point? Is it the camera, the person operating the camera? And then, of course, there's going to be challenges whether or not the camera was in proper working order, whether or not it's been regularly maintained. Those are the challenges that are going to come into play. Identification is going to be big. Is the photograph of the vehicle sufficient? I don't agree. I don't believe so. They will have to identify the driver, and I don't know. I haven't seen one. I obviously never been caught with a red light camera yet.
I haven't seen your picture.
Hopefully not.
I have to tell you the law or the bill that we passed does give you strict liability. That if that's a vehicle, the vehicle is what is registered.
Therein lies the problem, because now I understand the caller's concern, because let's say someone borrows your car, and they do get hit with a red light, and I've seen that there's that Likelike North School Street intersection again. My uncle from Kaneohe got one of those tickets. And the first question was, what do I do? And it was his car, it was his license. And the first question I had for him, and he had to confess, was, were you driving, uncle? And he said, yes. Okay, so pay the ticket. Right? But you will have situations where people will lend their car. And the question is, who's responsible for that? Are we going to penalize people, taxpayers who are paying the registration, who are maintaining their vehicle? They just lent it to someone, and then all of a sudden, they're getting charged with, I believe, at least a $250 fine at this point.
I think 107, right? Something like that. I think
yeah, I mean, if you add the fees, when you say a fine, let's say you have a $25 fine. It's not just the fine; you have fees that are attached to that. So a $25 fine becomes close to $100. And in this state of our economy, that's a concern for a lot of people. But our first defense would be identification, obviously, because now you're saying it's a strict liability. Now you're accusing the owner of the car to be the person who's running the red light.
To be responsible.
Yeah. So, Senator, do you share those concerns?
I do, but again, it's the responsibility of the driver, the owner. So that's why we said, okay, if there's a way that the cameras can be used, and so there's no fudging about my going through a red light. I think that way, again, it's a deterrent. It's be careful when you're driving. It's really, and if you're loaning your car, be careful of who you loan it to. So once again, it's making people much more responsible for their own actions.
I disagree. I actually disagree with that.
Do tell.
The reason why I disagree with that is you're not making people more responsible. You're just creating fear for people. If you really want to address, and I do share the concerns of Ms. Cheung. I have two sons myself, and I am concerned about their safety, especially crossing the street. They're 9 and 7 at this point, and I do have those concerns as well. If the concern is safety, then we need to look at how to better enforce safety in our communities. I think Ed's, based on what I've heard this evening, I like Ed's ideas of, it is a small price to pay to hear bumps in the night when people are driving across these bumps. It's a small price to pay to make sure that you slow down at a red light. Those are things that we can enforce. But when you start talking about penalties, and when you start talking about raising penalties, and it's wholesale, whoever has the car is strictly liable for that, you're going to have issues with that. And where are we going to stop? I mean, one of the concerns that we've always had is what happens when you increase penalties? I'll analogize this to what happened in the early 2000s when methamphetamine was a big deal in our communities. The penalty then was, if you were charged with a simple possession of methamphetamine, you're looking at a mandatory 1 year, 8 months in prison. Everybody went to trial. I cut my teeth as a trial attorney doing those kinds of cases because nobody wanted to settle. Nobody wanted to just say, I plead guilty, because they're looking at penalties. They're losing at least 5 years of their lives. So what happened many years later, we then pushed for Act 161. Senator, you remember that, right? And Act 44. What happened after that? The number of trials went down. We were able to address some of the issues that we were dealing with in the first place, which was drug rehabilitation, drug treatment. To the opposition of the prosecutor's office, Mr. Carlisle actually opposed Act 161. But what do we see in the long run is that we're actually addressing the root of the problem, which is what? Drug addiction in that. So similarly to this, I don't think increasing the penalty is going to help. What I think we need to look at is what are the better solutions at making sure that we do have those safety measures. Like addressing those traffic issues that we're talking about, having a green arrow when somebody's making a left turn, putting speed bumps, perhaps creating better locations for crosswalks, in school zones perhaps. I don't know what the stats are, but I'm sure that there are other measures that we can put in place to address the root of the problem.
So, so I have a question because I know that the public defender is going to defend everybody. And when you
it's a constitutional right, Senator.
Yes, I know. But when you defend people on their actions that have consequences for other people, what kinds of solutions do you see other than putting speed humps? These are all kind of system changes. But if the person is not following the law,
well, let's start with demographics.
What do you see as a way for me to be more responsible when I go behind the wheel, or if I loan my car to somebody behind the wheel? What do you see as a possible solution, if not saying we're going to raise a penalty? We have to show you that you have a consequence for what you do. So what
let's start with demographics. Who are the people who are driving without a license? And how many people, in the situation that we talked about previously, where the driver had, 160 citations, okay. How many of those people actually are in the system? I would hazard a guess that not too many. We do have what we call frequent flyers, people who constantly come in, but that's not a majority of those charged with driving without a license. Many of them are first-time offenders. And oftentimes the driving without a license charge, what happens is they get stopped for a broken taillight, an equipment violation, or even, it's not always speeding. It's always failing to turn your turn signal. People are stopped for those reasons. It's not just because they're speeding. So the question is, what do we do, right? We have to look at what we are doing before we start increasing penalties. We have to look at how do we better enforce it. I'm sorry, Senator, to answer your question, what solutions can we offer? First of all, let's take a look at the demographics of the people who are actually driving without a license. There's an economic issue here. Many of them, if you look at the demographics of people who are driving without a license, are on the lower end of that economic scale. But we are viewing this problem from a middle-class perspective. I'm sure, I don't know if I'm making any sense with everyone. We're looking at it from a middle to upper class perspective. We're looking at, if we look at the demographics, then let's address it from that perspective. And then what do? Let's start with education.
Yeah, but then I understand, because the total solution will be better education, better enforcement, better road design, better engineering. But then in the meantime, from today, what is the best middle ground? Because education awareness to a particular demographic, doesn't matter of middle class or lower class, it's not going to happen overnight. We can start today, but tomorrow is still going to have unlicensed driver out there. So from a civilian perspective, having hump and red lights, this is the interim solution that we can, before we put all the, redesign the road, which is not possible, the infrastructure.
Let's bring in Ed just really briefly. How many red light cameras do we have right now? How many are slated to come online? And to the caller's question, how effective are they? You gave the statistics with the speed bumps. Are there similar statistics for the cameras?
Absolutely. We have 10 of them right now. And the pilot that we got approved by the legislature allowed us 10 locations, all in the Honolulu district, so we can stay in one court district. We issued 27,000 red light citations from the beginning to now. It's about 1.5 years now. The good thing that we see is there's a 45% reduction in the number of citations that are being issued now since the time we started. And that reduction is a lot higher when you consider the baseline we went through. So it was about a 60% reduction since the baseline study that justified those 10 locations. So they were working right now. Of the 27,900 were thrown out for the 4 reasons that were allowed in our bill. Some of them were if you're pulling over for an emergency vehicle, if you're in a funeral procession, if you're directed by a police officer to do so. All of those are reasons that you can let the court know, and they can throw your case out. So overall, when we see the reductions that we had throughout, it's working. I mean, there's information, or there's data to show that the culture of driving through those intersections are working. There's changes that we're seeing. The great thing now is we've never tried to balance off the cost of the program with the citations. I would much rather issue 0. That's what we're trying to go for. So I know one of the callers was saying that a lot of cities dumped this because they couldn't make it work. We're not trying to balance out the costs here. We're trying to get everybody to 0 red light running. That's it. And if we got to fund it to ensure that we get those at those locations, we're fine with that.
Okay, and so 10 so far, and how many in the pipeline?
So we don't have any plan yet. We need to get to the end of this year for the pilot to be done. We all report to the legislature before we move forward on any other locations. Now, we'll say there are a bunch of legislators and a bunch of communities who are asking for red lights to go into their areas. And rightfully so. There's dangerous intersections where people are flying through it right now. So we're trying to weigh out those data now to see which locations we would target up first. But everybody should understand, this is not like van cams. This is not going to pop up overnight. We're not going to move it to different locations throughout the state. It's going to be at that intersection. And before we start running any citations in those areas, we're going to let everybody know. We're going to tell you. We're going to put up signs and everything to say so. There's going to be a 60-day educational period for you to know that it's going to be there. Another 30 days of warnings before we start citations. Then we start the citations from there. So we're going to give ample advance notice to everybody to ensure that everybody understands that this is what's going to happen in this area.
And I want to stick with you for a second because Raymond has a question. The state has had pushback for trying to implement roundabouts, which are proven to be safer than traffic lights. Why don't we go beyond speed humps and install more roundabouts? The roundabouts, they certainly get a lot of phone calls, I would imagine, to your office when they come into a neighborhood.
Yeah, we are. We're pushing a lot more roundabouts. There's one Kahikili that's going in right now, Kahikili and Kamehameha Highway. It's always been a difficult left in that area. We have 2 more going in on the Big Island, another going in on Kauai. So we're pushing them more throughout the state, but they got to be in the right spots. Roundabouts work best when there's a balance of traffic in both directions. And of course, enough space for it to be level in an area. The difficulty with roundabouts is you need a lot more space than a normal intersection, and it's going to cost a lot more. In the long run, it'll be the cost will be reduced because we don't have to worry about power or changing equipment and the like. But upfront, it's a big investment that we're willing to put in, provided we have the space and the right conditions for them.
Karen, I'm interested, you've had a lot of success in Kakaʻako right at that park, and I know you've done a lot of advocating in this last legislative session. When you're trying to figure out as a group of mothers what areas need the most help, how are you doing that as a collective, and have you found government to be responsive?
How do we identify the area? I think it's just by walking with our strollers, to be honest. It's like, we just experience ourselves when we walk to one location or other, that we cannot be seen by a vehicle when they make a right turn and we're close hit. So that's how we identify. And has the government been responsive? This is a bit of a tricky question. In the whole scheme of things, they are responsive, but as a civilian, as a community that want effective change, I don't think it's responsive enough. I believe that strongly that the government has enough resources and experience to actually put out proactive solution ahead of civilians or communities' complaint. I feel like they can do a lot of things more faster and better in a lot of ways. But I guess to balance the reality, I understand there's procedures, there's protocols. This is the best what we have. And I believe that, for all the community that is not, let's say, in the middle class, we are the people, we have the power. You need to come together and you need to make yourself heard. You need to come together. The only reason that we were heard because we came together 300 mothers strong. So you need to do it for your community. No one's gonna do it for you. Mm-hmm. So I really believe in that. Let it be, pedestrian safety or anything that you believe in. You need to come together as a whole.
Yeah, and Senator, I know that one of the things you referenced was this measure to try to get the counties and the state to work more closely. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and if you think it will lead to the kind of change that she's talking about?
I think so. We're trying to be more proactive, so that bill was there to see what are the critical areas that really have problems and to have the county and the state working together and coming up with solutions and planning ahead and as Karen's saying, be a little bit more proactive than after an accident, a tragedy having happened. So we're hoping that this will at least encourage the counties to work with the State Department, because those are really the where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. Where we want to really see some improvements, but in terms of what is possible and planning ahead, because everything costs, but how do we get them to work together to find those solutions for the community?
Mr. Aquino, I wanted to see if you could take this one down from Henry. He says, I think there should be a crackdown on cars that have lapsed safety checks and registration. That would reduce the amount of cars on the road, then bring in the folks who have more than 2 unpaid fines and consider revoking licenses, increase penalties for DUI. Prevention should start before the key turns. Interested to hear your thoughts on Henry's comment there.
Prevention begins before the key turns. Let's start with this. One of the things that I wanted to respond to is when we take a look at people who are unlicensed and why can they not get licensed. Let's assume that somebody who's licensed, they're very respectful when it comes to the law, they're following the law. But a lot of it is how do I put it? It becomes a black hole for people who are unlicensed. So let's say you pick up your first driving without a license and you receive a fine. And because of the demographics, the economic background that you have, you cannot pay those fines. And then, of course, you can't get a license. So you need to drive, and you're going to drive again. And you're going to increase, you're going to have an increased penalty. You're going to be, given those fines again. And it just increases and increases to the point where it becomes difficult for you. I know that the court had communities in the court, for example, court in the communities where they've actually gone and worked with individuals who cannot get a license to try and remove the license stopper, to do community service work and whatnot, so that they can then get their license, so that they can then be your licensed driver who are driving in the communities. That's one way that's one solution that we can have. Perhaps putting more money into that type of a solution would better serve the community, because you're actually allowing people who cannot get licenses because of license blockers, because of financial issues, have them work it out and have them figure out a way to take care of that so that they can get licensed. That's one way to fix that. Now, DUI, one interesting thing is when I looked at the statistics, there's actually a higher fatality when it comes to DUI than it is to speeding in our state. Nationally speaking, if my memory serves me, we're actually below the national average when it comes to pedestrian fatalities. But we have a higher fatality when it comes to drunk driving. And I know we have increased penalties over the years with that. And there's, like, for example, the interlock now. That's now required. When I first started practicing law many moons ago, it was essentially I believe, a 30-day license suspension. Now it's not just that. There's also interlock, where you have to blow into something in order to see whether or not you are able to drive. That's some of the, I would consider some of the middle ground solutions that we can do. Even having a conditional license. Driver's education. Let's say somebody does not have a license. Create a system, perhaps a probation system, where they can do driver education. You require that of them, and then on top of that, have them monitored to see whether or not they can comply. Those are some of the solutions that I can think off the top of my head. I don't know if that's something that is feasible for the system, but those are solutions that I can think of.
You know, Karen, I mean, what Ed is really laying out here is really that it becomes a class issue. But what are your thoughts on this? You know, on the arguments that he's laying out, and versus, you know, the one that Henry has put out here that we really need to crack down.
You know, I went out with a police officer one night to understand what is how many people are driving under without license, and then also did the wet lap to see that how fast will I get intoxicated, can't drive. And actually, when I spoke with the police officer, it's actually quite a serious issue here on the island. It's probably like every 10 people they pulled over, it's 8 at night in an 8-hour shift. I understand the education and all of that, it's very important. But I still believe that it will be different, the perception of this, when you have lost someone, when it's on you. And I believe that is long-term prevention. And I'm not talking about you're changing the infrastructure and all that, but I want immediate solution. I don't want to get myself hit tomorrow. So what is the best way? Yeah, it could be fear. Fear deters people from doing a lot of things. Well, red light camera, I was like, oh, okay, I should slow down because I don't want to pay the fine. And the fact that, okay, then what if people who borrow your car, then the owner should take responsibility. I should think twice who I lent my car to. And if someone take the car out and I don't know, like what happened with Sarah, it was the parents' car, then at least I would know that I need to stop lending the person's car. It traced back to responsibility. It's a linkage to the registered driver. And I think resource, money, all that, but are we really going to put a number on a human life? Are you, viewer, going to put a number on your daughter's or son's life?
You know, Ed, it goes back to this whole principle of driving being a privilege, not a right. And so I think that there's some of that at play here, too. It is graduation season. We got about 10 minutes left, so I want to get to a few more of these questions, but I do want to give you an opportunity to talk about intoxicated driving, especially because we have a lot of graduations this weekend and beyond.
Yeah, and you guys saw the signs up on the highways, making sure that everybody...
Ole alcohol. I've seen them all, yes.
Yeah. We're trying to make sure that we put a lot of education out there. And as Ed had talked about, we have a drunk driving issue in our state. 55% of the fatalities that occur in our system are because of drunk or drug driving.
55. 55.
National average is about 33 to 37%. So we're way above that. Everybody around the table grew up with our families going out to the park at 8 a.m. in the morning playing baseball, parents drinking all day, driving back home at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night. So that was the culture that a lot of people grew up in. We got to try and break that culture now. That discussion on 1 or 2 drinks and I'm still okay, it's got to go away. When we decide that we're going to go out and have a couple of drinks, I think we should be deciding at that point that I need another way to get there and another way to get home, just to make sure. Because if anybody's ever gone through the wet lab, you're at 0.03 and all of a sudden you're at 1.2. Yeah. And that's the way it works. That's the mentality that happens when a person starts drinking. So overall perspective, I love that people can enjoy themselves. I love they can go out and have a couple of drinks and everything. I don't want them on our roadway when they do that. So we'd love for everybody to just decide right now that all fatalities because of drunk and drug driving are preventable, 100%, and it just starts with that decision.
Okay. There's some questions here. I just want to make sure we include our neighbor island folks here. And if you could take this one as well, from Leo in Puna. Is there any pattern to the high number of fatal accidents on the Big Island so far this year? For a rural county, this seems like a lot.
It is a lot. And if we look at historically at the numbers, when we start exceeding 110 fatalities, mainly we can see that Big Island's fatalities have been up big. And what we're seeing this year, and it's not always the same, but this year what we're seeing is a lot of crossover crashes on the highways in areas where people are passing, but not passing in passing zones or not ending their passing in the passing zones. So our staff is out there now trying to adjust those passing areas to ensure that people start and end in areas that they can actually still see. There are a lot of the fatalities that occurred on the highways this year on the Big Island, people were crossing back over around the bend. Mm-hmm. And then that's the difficulty. I cannot feel, for me, taking that risk to get around a vehicle without being able to see around it. but some people are doing it, and we got to stop it.
Yeah, and you know, I grew up on the Big Island, and I think a lot of it is familiarity. You think you know this road, and you've done it however many times, and so that bend doesn't feel so dangerous.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Karen, there's a question for you from Leah in Kaimuki. She says, what advice do you have for moms or anyone really in their communities who's frustrated with the speeding or traffic law violators and nothing is being done about it? You said that you started organizing with a poster board, $3 at Walmart, and it grew from there. Tell us about that.
$3, that's how it got started. It was from Walmart, the phone board. My best advice is that get you guys organized, okay? Talk to each other, and then go to the neighborhood board. This is the first place where you kind of express your concern in your neighborhood, and then reach out to your city council. And shall all that fail, reach to the media. Write a proper media release. It doesn't take much. There's tons of templates online. And then just to stand out there with a board. The first day, no one would notice you, but just gather your moms and just stand out there with a poster.
And what did your poster say?
Slow down, paint back our crosswalk. That's it. It was so simple. And then I think like we are so privileged to like live here like on the island, and it's small enough that it will grab attention. So take advantage of that and really fight for your community. It's not as hard as it seems like. I created Instagram, page for the Ward Village moms, and I didn't even ever had Instagram before. I'm 38 years old, but now, okay, I can work it. But it's just simple things. You have a will, get your people organized, communicate, have your points clear, exactly what you want, why, and ask for our communication, ask for people to respond, and action point.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left, so I want to make sure I get to everyone. Senator, just a final thought on this subject. I think, she's inspired us all to grassroots, and someone like you really listens to a group like that.
Definitely, and we have worked together, so thank you, Karen, and many of her ward village moms. But I think both sides, hearing everybody here, that we can have all the laws in the world, but it's really up to each of us. So what we used to learn, drive defensively. I also say, walk defensively, look right and left whenever you're walking across the street, so that we all together can be safer and not have these kinds of tragedies in our community.
Yeah, Ed, a final thought from you tonight on this.
I agree with everyone on the table that we should not be losing lives. One of the things that I think we need to be reminded of is that when we do make laws, it cannot just be a knee-jerk reaction. We need to be more responsible. This is our community. We are all living here. So we need to consider how is it that we can raise everyone up rather than just penalizing everyone. So that's my final thought on this.
Okay. I'm really hearing from you that there is a concern that the wrong people will bear the brunt of the penalty.
I believe so. I've been a public defender now for a quarter of a century. It's pretty long. And one of the things that I've always seen is that whenever there is a concern, it is always the poor who bear the brunt. It's not the real people, the real culprits who bear the brunt. It's the poor who bear the brunt, and that's the concern that we always have.
Okay. Mr. Sniffen, there's one comment that I want to read that I think kind of leads you in. I think improvement of the roads, intersections, traffic signals, and signs would be more effective than speed humps and red light cameras. The roads themselves also need work, especially after this rain. I find myself driving pretty poorly because I'm dodging all these potholes these last few days that weren't there a week ago. So, to Anne's point, it's the roads and the enforcement.
Definitely. So the infrastructure itself, we have infrastructure we put in place since the 60s. If we look at the annual maintenance that was done since then, it's been poor actually. So we've been reconstructing everything since 2015 and reconstructing in the right way and make sure that everything is rebuilt from the base all the way up. That takes time, it takes a lot of money, but we're doing it on all of the state systems. We're doing it to ensure that it'll last us to 25 years without having those potholes. And when it lasts to 25 years, we're making sure that we push more of the federal funds towards the cities and the counties who have more roads than us and more things to fix. So we're trying to plus up the system overall as we go forward, but it'll take time. And in that interim, we all got to decide how we're going to drive on the system that we have right now. It's easy for all of us to blame the system for something that's happening. we all got to start taking responsibility. We talked tonight about red light cams, about speed humps, and about laws that are being put in place for that. Really, it's a responsibility thing. If we all started talking about our responsibility versus the law that we got to follow, I think we'd be in a better place. If we all decided that we're going to be responsible and make sure that we minimize the potential for me to kill myself or somebody else in the system, I think we'd be in a better place. And some of these discussions could just go away.
Mm. Yeah, and that sort of brings us to you, Karen. You know, I know you've worked closely with Sarah Yara's mother, and I think, you know, when you started talking tonight, the first thing you said was, I'm doing this because I'm a mom. I mean, bring us back to that about what motivates you and what you would tell to others who are getting behind the wheel.
It's about preventing death. And then when I worked with Sarah's mom, I saw what actually shocked me was her grief. And it's a total preventable death. So, so yeah, that keeps me really motivated because this is not easy. Community work, it's not paid for. It can be isolating. You're fighting an institution. You know, sometimes you feel like it's not progressing. But what really keeps me grounded is that I'm not only saving myself, I'm saving my children, and I could saving my friend's children or friend's grandma. And as long as that one person's life is saved, I'm good. And I don't need to know, you know, the number. I know I'm good. So speak out. And I think this kind of conversation, we need closer conversation with the government to be part of the participation in infrastructure building. That's so important.
Well, thank you for being here tonight. Mahalo to you for joining us. Of course, we do thank our guests, State Senator Sharon Moriwaki and Deputy Public Defender Edward Aquino, State DOT Director Ed Sniffen, and Karen Cheung of Ward Village Moms. Next week on Insights, we are giving you a preview of the August primary election. Ballots will be arriving by mail in just 2 months. So far, though, no major challengers have emerged to incumbents in higher office, but there are some pretty interesting races shaping up elsewhere, and we will break it all down. Please do join us then. I'm Yanji Denise for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Until next time, aloha.
Local broadcasts of Insights on PBS Hawaii are made possible by the support of viewers like you. Mahalo, and by Carl Smith Ball, providing legal services throughout Hawaii and the Pacific since 1857, making a positive difference in the communities where we live and work.
Missy. Tony Award winner Leslie Odom Jr.